All right. Welcome everyone to the closing plenary of the Online Writing Centers Association's 2023 virtual conference. Our theme for today's plenary is So You Want to Plan an Online Event. We have four panelists who I will introduce in a moment. And we really wanted to focus on this theme today because of just who we are as an association and that theme of multimodality that has run throughout today and yesterday. All right. So before we jump into our closing session, I want to take the time to encourage all of you who attended to complete our conference survey form, which Kim is going to helpfully drop into the chat for me. Your feedback is invaluable as we plan and prepare for our 2024 conference. As with all of our sessions today, please make note that we are recording. We do have 2 sign language interpreters who are spotlighted. If you cannot see them at any point throughout the session, please message us directly and let us know. If you are not speaking, we do ask that you keep your audio off. And you are welcome to post comments and questions in the chat at any time, or use the little raise your hand feature on Zoom to let us know you wish to speak. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is Megan Beauchart-Burrell. She is our OWCA president and fearless leader. She is also the director of the Old Dominion University Writing Center, where she is also working on her PhD in English. Bree LaFond is our OWCA Virtual Events Chair. She is a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois, where she is affiliated with the Center for Writing Studies and the Campus Writing Center. Kim Peck, who you have met before, is our conference chair this year. She is the director of the Academic Success Center at York College of Pennsylvania and the co-editor of Young Scholars in Writing. She has a PhD in English, also from Old Dominion. Our final panelist today is Dwayne Theobald, who is a member of multiple OWCA committees. He has been invaluable, I know, to both Kim and I and Bree as parts of the virtual events and conference committees. He is the program manager for the Center for Economic Education and Financial Literacy at the University of West Georgia. And he's been a past representative for the Southeastern Writing Center Association and past president for the Georgia Tutoring Association. My name, for those of you who did not join us this morning, is Erica Magish, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I am the co-chair for this year's conference, and next year I will take on the mantle of chair, those of you who want to join me as co-chair. In my day job, I am the director of the Writing Center at Drew University, and as every typical millennial, I have a side hustle as an aerial yoga instructor. And with that said, I'm going to lead us into some questions to consider for today. I'm just going to leave these up and then I'll take the screen down so we can have a true panel roundtable discussion, but I just wanted to throw them up on the screen for our panelists to consider and the group. And these questions include: what sets an online-only event apart? Are there types of sessions that work best online only, or can anything be adapted for an online or hybrid environment? What are some strengths and weaknesses of online-only events? In regards specifically to planning and organization, what is perhaps your top lesson learned or advice you have for before, after, and during an online event? What is the best method for combating Zoom fatigue during these longer day-long, multiple-day events? And why is accessibility so important for online events? Or how do we even create best practices for these? And then lastly, in this post-Zoom panic world, what do you believe is the next step in the evolution of online events? So I'm going to stop my screen share to let our panelists take center stage. And if any of them want to start out with any of the questions, I'm happy to just sort of let it go. And if any of our audience members has a question in particular that they want to focus on or thoughts, please let us know. And thank you, Elle, for dropping questions in the chat.
So I can start us off with just this first question: what sets an online only event apart from hybrid or in person? So for me, and this gets to one of the questions kind of later, but just thinking about kind of accessibility and inclusivity, I think is one of the key things. The standard for so long was in-person events, and that's what conferences kind of looked like. That's what we kind of imagined they should be. But I think we didn't recognize, or weren't willing to recognize, how often people were left out of that. The kind of cost and need for kind of able-bodiedness that travel requires is something that I think was just generally assumed that that's just how it is. And I think that's, looking back now, pretty terrible that that's just how we kind of thought about and approached thinking about kind of professional development and networking opportunities. I think hybrid offers great opportunities to provide more kind of accessibility. But I think one of the challenges that I've noticed, at least with hybrid events, is that they tend to still kind of view the online portion as an add-on. I was just most recently at a conference, a regional conference for Learning Center associates, and they had a Zoom option. And I can't even tell you how often they would be like, "Oh shoot, we forgot to turn the Zoom on," or "We forgot to put this on," kind of for the Zoom folks. So I think that hybrid is a really important step, but there's often lacks sort of the intentionality. Whereas an online event, generally, there are still challenges, obviously, in terms of technology requirements to participate. So it's not, a utopia kind of perfect kind of thing, but I do think that an online event allows for more intentionality with kind of accessibility and inclusivity.
And thinking about and building off of that observation, Kim, about like the additive nature of online events, or a lot of online events that we've seen. And you kind of brought this up as you came in as the conference chair, is thinking about, if it is going to be online, why is it online? And I think that's a philosophy that not only we have tried to bring to the conference, but also in ongoing programming that we're offering, is to think about the affordances that technology allows us to engage and interact. So if we were at an in-person conference, the ability to meet with people, to network, to have conversations in the hallway, to share a bagel down in the conference hotel. We don't get to have all those exact same things, but thinking about and using, like, mindfully and thoughtfully the technologies that we do have available in order to find ways to connect, I think has been kind of an important philosophical point that we've tried to bring into programming.
I would say one of the things to keep in mind too with online events, online programming, is that you have the ability to connect with people that you would never have the opportunity to connect with. And I'll use this group as an example. I got to know all of you through this kind of work and through other conversations. One of the things before I left the Writing Center world at my university is I helped lead conversations, a conversation series that we had folks attending from all across the country. During during the height of COVID, and of course, kind of after that, really getting to connect with people and getting to know people and getting to see how they do the work in their centers versus how I did things in my center. It's really kind of amazing. And I think that, and this kind of touches on one of the later questions, but I'm sure we'll touch on it again, is kind of what does online programming, online events look like kind of, in a, kind of distanced from the height of COVID. I think you have to keep it going because that connectivity still needs to exist. It still needs to be present. And I think that during the height of COVID, we really recognize the importance for it. And I hope that, my hope is that moving beyond, the probably the toughest time of COVID, we keep in mind that that work still needs to be done, that presence still needs to be there.
I'll just add to, just thinking about the conference today, in one of the Q&A sessions we had a participant in Sri Lanka and a participant in Brazil as, part of this. So I think that online events also provide more opportunity for us to make international connections, which I think both for OWCA and other writing center organizations is a goal, but it's one that online affords. But even then, we still have to think, there's still decisions to be made. I know Erica and I, when we were trying to think about the timing kind of the conference and when certain sessions, we wanted to make sure that, our presenter in Sri Lanka didn't have to present at like midnight or 1 a.m. kind of her time. And so even when we aren't kind of dealing with physical space, there are still time constraints that I think are incredibly important. And I think a challenge that online events have that in-person don't have. I got an email from someone, at some point saying, oh no, I missed this session because I, was thinking about Central Time versus Eastern Time. And that is, I think the time zone difference is a real logistical kind of challenge for those that are really thinking intentionally about organizing online events.
So one of the things that I appreciate about online events, and this is something that I've kept in mind when I planned online exclusive events when I ran our writing center here at the university, and also through my work in the Georgia Tutoring Association, and even in the center that I work in now, is thinking about ways that you can intentionally engage with your participants. So one of the things that I love is that we have platforms out there like Kahoot, where you can set up something where people can engage in real time. I very recently, within the last year, did a conference presentation and used Jamboards, which if you've never used a Jamboard, they're amazing and they're really easy to use. I joke with people that I'm not the most technologically savvy person in the world and I can use them. One of the things that has been really great is that, when you do something in an online format, you do want to have that connected piece to your participants, and that then forces those of us that put those events together to think what might be the best way to do that, what might be the best mechanism. And one of the things that I think you have to keep in mind when you particularly plan a virtual event is to be prepared for the best laid plans and be prepared for something to not necessarily work the way you want it to. I can't tell you how many times I've had that happen with technology, with overall intentionality, with an activity or with some kind of point I'm trying to get across. The biggest thing that I try to keep in mind is when the technology fails, when the platform I want to use doesn't quite resonate, whatever it is, at the end of the day, at the end of that event, what do the participants get from it? If they get the meat, if they get the substantive value that I'm trying to get across, or that the entity I'm working with is trying to get across in that event setting, then that's great. Things in the middle can be a little messy, but as long as the end result is that people get what they need to get from the event, then that's what matters the most.
I will jump off what Dwayne said, especially the kind of preparing for what you may not expect. Thinking about in terms of just like one of the lessons learned since I worked with Bree last year too on virtual events is just thinking about, you know, similar to the writing process, right? You kind of have to plan out how you're imagining or envisioning that online event taking place. But then you actually kind of have to play test it a little bit. And that includes like kind of getting some other people in there and saying, hey, how does this actually look or feel like both during and after, especially when trying to make those things accessible, like the videos and that kind of thing, making sure that the way you've set everything up is going to deliver the recording and what you want on the recording as best as possible. And so doing that play testing and trying things out and testing it, I think is really helpful just for making sure that the vision that you have for that experience for your online participants is actually what's going to end up happening.
And I think part of that is building in redundancies. I feel like this, even before kind of we came on, I want to like give a big shout out to the organizers of the inaugural OWCA conference and kind of the way that they approach things. Even just the fact, you know, there are 2 moderators. We have a chair and a conference chair, you know, that multiple people have access to the Zoom accounts to you know, make sure kind of that they run. I really think like Dwayne's point about, you know, you never know what technology is going to do. I think you have to assume that something's going to go wrong. Like that's just how technology kind of works. And so at least for me, as someone who is, I think a worrier, having the redundancy built in made me feel so much more confident coming into these 2 days that, you know, if I had an issue with my internet or, you know, if a moderator wasn't able to attend, that we weren't all of a sudden kind of scrambling, that we had kind of these backup plans and redundancies already kind of put in place. So it's more work on the front end, I think, and potentially there's more intentionality that has to go into that planning that's different than a face-to-face, where I think it is pretty kind of easy sometimes to fly by the seat of your pants and make changes because everyone is in the same space. But if there are technology issues, that becomes more challenging when people are dispersed. So having those redundancies built in is, I think, one of the important lessons that I would kind of share with anyone thinking about wanting to plan any sort of online event.
I think going along with that, it's planning for longevity. So continually documenting the processes that we've gone through, why we decided particular ways of doing things versus others. Sometimes just over preparing. So just so that there is a safety net always in place. I think that has been a really key part of the process, and really want to thank Janelle, who's on the call from last year, kind of getting us started with a lot of those like really detailed process notes and giving us a model to continue to follow. And so folks who continue to do this work in the future have those materials to continue to build on. I think that's really key.
I would say another piece to online event planning is, and this is true for face-to-face as well, but really be willing to assess and really be willing to, as we've talked about, you know, think about your process, but think about your process and what worked, what didn't, what could be tweaked, but also the overall program as a whole, the overall event as a whole, what works well, what doesn't. That's where, you know, earlier before as we were kind of getting started, that, you know, kind of feedback form, that kind of stuff is really valuable. And one of the ways that I tend to think of that in my mind is, you know, students getting student evaluations. It's a way for that instructor, for that professor to get feedback. Is it always nice? No. Sometimes it really hurts. But it is extremely productive and useful. And one of the things that I tell my students, and I also tell people when I organize an event, if you've got feedback, give it to me. Good, bad, or ugly, I want to know, because one of the best ways to make something better for the next year or the next go around is to know what works well, what doesn't, what needs to be tweaked. And in some cases, what things need to be brought into place and really intentionally factored in. There may be a particular platform you're using for an event that maybe just doesn't quite give you everything you want. So you want to go with something else. I this last year got roped into helping the Georgia Tutoring Association again with their 20th annual 20th conference. And we used an entirely new platform that was as foreign of an online platform as I've ever used. And I cannot remember the name of it. It escapes me. But in practice, in execution, it actually worked pretty well. But it cost us money. It was one of those things we had to really think about. And it cost us money, but it allowed for good intentional interaction with one another. So there's different things that when you're planning an event, you can factor a lot of things in when it comes to planning something out, but also being willing to, at the end of the day, assess what works well, what doesn't, and being thoughtful about how you can approach that the next go around.
And kind of thinking about that, kind of maybe turning to accessibility a little bit. We've kind of started to bring up that we ask a lot of participants in this conference in terms of the materials that we asked folks to prepare to present. We ask for scripts far in advance. And we acknowledge and know that that's quite a bit of labor. And we definitely have gotten feedback from past presenters that maybe it's too much. But I think Kim, you were the first one to bring this up, like really framing it as a service, as a professional development practice for folks that you can potentially bring into or adapt into your own context, I think is really important. And I guess just kind of also acknowledging that as much as we're over preparing and doing things, like we're asking our presenters to do the same in order to create these experiences. And hopefully you all are seeing the benefits of that as attendees.
Also, we promise that while we are asking presenters to do a lot of labor, all of us who are working on the conference also do a lot of labor pre and post the conference to make sure that those materials are accessible as well, because we think that the labor is worth it.
Well, and along the lines of labor, one of the things that I would say, and I will preface with, I'm really good at saying this, I'm not always good at doing it, is the self-care. Make sure to factor that in for yourself. You need to have some time to truly disconnect from planning that event, from doing the nitty-gritty detail work that needs to be done, or working with other folks to get it done. Like with this conference, for example, I would have loved to have been in every single session at every single time. I could not. I had to take some time to get away from my computer. I had to take some time to go grab lunch and totally disconnect. And I think that, at least for me, when I would do face-to-face conferences, I would go to everything I could possibly get my hands on. And it was great, but also I found myself overly fatigued. And especially with online work, I can't do that. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a very necessary to have that time to break away. So I would say if you do plan some kind of event, some kind of conference, whatever it is, give yourself the time to breathe and give yourself the time to actually truly disconnect from what you're working on.
And I think that's one of the benefits of online, particularly, for an event like our conference, where we are actually recording all sessions and posting them, and then you'll be able to view them later. That I can remember doing my very first in-person conference that I went to. I went to sessions straight through. I went to 6 in a row or something, and then my brain was dead. I couldn't even get in more information, and I kind of had to learn that yes, you actually do need to take breaks. That's not you being bad or lazy, that you're intentional about going. But with both kind of the asynchronous kind of options as well as kind of the recordings, and then having there be kind of an opportunity for viewing these materials for longer than just kind of our 2-day kind of live conference, my hope is that people will be able to kind of continue to engage in this when you actually have the brain space to do that, because it's very easy to log into a Zoom session and then zone out. I mean, you could do that in person too, but I find it's even easier to do it kind of online and not fully kind of engage in it. So giving yourself kind of the opportunity to wait until you actually can take something from the material when you engage.
I'm kind of thinking about this kind of preparation like topic, and kind of connecting this to maybe like lessons learned. As much as we prepare and as much as we ask folks to do, we always think of something else while it's happening. I remember the first year, I had kind of written myself a moderator script, just because I get anxious and I just wanted to be able to put it on autopilot. And then we kind of realized, oh, maybe that was something we should have just done and provided for all the moderators. And now we've instituted that this year. And then this year kind of thinking like, now that we're keeping the same Zoom rooms open and that kind of interim awkward silence, maybe we should play some music. So like we're continually finding those new things and experimenting, and there's always something else we can learn and bring around to the next time. And it's, again, like Dwayne kind of highlighted, why we really encourage folks to fill out that feedback, because we really want to be able to respond to it and make changes for next time.
Well, and I would say too, when it comes to again, if you're looking ahead to planning your own online event, one, attend online events with some regularity, kind of see what's being done. And two, while you're seeing what's being done, take note. And take note to yourself of the things you love. Take note of the things that you don't love. And if you don't love them, how would you change it? How would you modify it? Again, I've been to some online events where accessibility is not even a factor. They don't even let it into their head. And again, after being involved with the OWCA, it is something that I'm very aware of now, to the point that when I'm in an online event and I don't see it, I cringe, because I'm like, you could do these couple of little things to make this better, or to make this more accessible, more user-friendly. And again, immerse yourself in that. Also, be willing to talk to other people who have done this work. Again, being here in something like this helps a lot. But also, if you've got a friend or got a colleague who does this kind of work regularly, talk to them. Be like, hey, you've done this. Give me the skinny, give me the good, the bad, the ugly. What should I keep in mind? And I would say in most of academia, we're willing to do that, regardless of how an event went.
And I'll say that was a real inspiration for me in terms of thinking about my approach for this conference, was having attended lots of online conferences in the wake of COVID. And one thing that I realized about myself, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is that I struggle to sit and listen to something on Zoom for an hour plus. Just when I am just being asked to take in information, I don't know, it just doesn't kind of work for me kind of as well. So one of the kind of things that was important to me in terms of trying to think about this conference was that if things were synchronous, there was a reason that they were synchronous. That being able to just share kind of, research or your experience, thinking about the typical 20-minute conference session where you talk about kind of, your context or your work that you've done. There wasn't a need for that to be synchronous. And I know that was, I think, a challenge as we were working kind of with participants of trying to kind of express that vision, because that's really ingrained in us, is what a conference presentation is. And this was a conference, but we really didn't have standard conference presentations. We didn't have the panel session where you have kind of 3 people, sharing their projects and then kind of the Q&A at the end. We felt like, couldn't that be asynchronous, where then there, you can engage kind of with each project kind of individually. So that's, I think, still something that we're, figuring out as an organization, that we're figuring out kind of as a, just broadly as people interacting online versus face-to-face, or what are things that we can kind of engage and tolerate face-to-face that don't work online, and kind of and vice versa.
Does anyone in our audience have any comments or questions other than what we had originally started with? Happy to have a larger conversation with the group as well. And I'll also repost the questions that we started with in the chat.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to just like echo like those of you that have attended kind of online events. What are the things that you've, you know, seen that worked well, or what are things that are like, you're like, oh no, this is happening again, kind of when you've gone either to a conference or a webinar. What are kind of the experiences of some of these online events that you've been part of?
So I like the fact that you guys specifically said between sessions, just you could stay in the room and just use the time to chat. I think otherwise you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be doing, and it just feels weird sometimes to leave and then come back, leave, and so forth. So, you know, I liked having that little bit of space in between. I think it's important to me. That common space is kind of, think of it as sort of like the hallway outside the meeting rooms, you know, where people might just sit and chat over what they just heard or something like that. So I thought that was a really good idea.
Yeah, I think that's something we definitely learned in comparison to the year before, and trying to navigate multiple Zoom rooms, multiple Zoom accounts. But also there's always that flip side of labor, and it's meant like very long days for some folks of having to be here all day to maintain those Zoom rooms. So, you know, there's always that balance in trying to find those things. But I mean, I would agree. I think allowing for that liminality, that liminal space has really been helpful.
Well, and if we think about the things that within a face-to-face setting, you know, within that kind of context, what are some of the things that we value and would like to see carried over? You know, as I can't remember who it was that mentioned it, but being able to interact with your colleagues, that's what that provides. It provides you a little bit of time to do that, and a dedicated space to do it. Yes, it does require somebody to be on, but also, and this kind of comes down to something I've kept in mind in planning events. What are you going to privilege? What is something that you're going to ensure happens within that event? And what is potentially something that you know is important, but it may not be something that you can always keep in mind. It may need to be something that stays on the cutting room floor. And honestly, that's the hard part about planning any kind of event, but also being in a leadership role where you're planning an event, is being willing to have those tough conversations and having those tough moments of, okay, these are the things that we want to do. Here are the resources and the time in which we have to do it. What is feasible? And that's tough. It's not easy. And I would say I can definitely speak for myself. There have been times I've kicked myself in planning something and missing a piece, but also recognizing that there are other things that probably work well and that do work well. And if something can't always be implemented, that's not the end of the world.
So where we kind of came across, like that came up for us, a big one was thinking about the schedule and how we were going to set this. And so this comes into, you know, thinking about some of the Zoom fatigue and things like that. When Erica and I had built a first version of the schedule, we had built it in where there were much longer breaks. And the way that the day was structured was much more sort of modular, so that, you know, depending on which session you attended, there could be a 15-minute break, or there could be a 45-minute break until there was another session kind of coming up. And you know, we even, you know, thought, okay, do we want to have a like lunch or dinner kind of time where we're kind of closed and kind of off? But one of our other kind of important values in terms of the accessibility was having our ASL interpreters here. And we, in terms of thinking about kind of the cost structure of what made sense for us to do, our original structure that we had set up was not cost efficient in any kind of way. And so we had to kind of make some decisions. And yeah, this you know, Laura's talking about the guilt of kind of missing a session. We were kind of trying to build in opportunities that wouldn't happen, because if you attended a 45-minute session that was running concurrently with an hour and 15, then yeah, there was a 45-minute break before kind of the before the next one. And so you didn't feel like you were kind of skipping a session. But we ultimately, you know, decided kind of against that. And yeah, Madeline, I think that's such an important point too, is like, how much time do we need for a break? How do we kind of do that? And I think we just ended up deciding as a conference committee that it wasn't necessarily our kind of call or our job to kind of do that we recognize that our participants, that attendees can know, I need a break, or I can't, attend this session, or I'm only going to attend kind of these certain sessions. So yeah, there's a lot of balancing, I think, that goes into thinking, particularly for these longer events. For my folks with virtual events, I'm interested in, even just when you are trying to think about, is your event going to be an hour? Is it going to be 2 hours, an hour and a half? Is it going to be in the afternoon? Like, what are some of the things that kind of have gone into when you've, even for kind of, more shorter kind of one-off events that go into some of those like time kind of negotiation things?
Well, oh, sorry, Dwayne, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is depending on your topic, and I'm thinking specifically, and some of the, I know that Bree will remember, but some of the other folks here may as well. We had an event where we had 3 faculty members that spoke about research. It's been a very recent event. And when we were putting that together, thinking about, okay, these are the 3 different faculty we have. These are the different experiences they bring with them when it comes to how they work with their students when it comes to research. Making sure to give them enough time and space to present what they wanted to present, while also keeping in mind that that individual person's contributions are important, but there are also 2 other people too. So I think when you're thinking about an online event, you have to consider how many people you're wanting to present or wanting to be a part of an event. And then also, what are their areas of expertise? And then to some degree, if you know the people that you're organizing, that they're going to be presenting well, knowing, are they one that get the gift for gab, or are they ones that, will be a little bit more intentional with what they say and how they say it, and that they'll keep it to a tight 15 or a tight 20 if they need to. So there's the balance of really knowing the people that are going to be working with you or presenting at that event.
I was just going to say too, going along with that, our accessibility practices end up meaning we have better prepared presenters who have taken the time to think through and know they have a 15-minute talk or they have a 17-minute talk because they've had to prepare a script and hopefully have practiced it. So I think our accessibility practices end up also hopefully making for better events. I was also going to kind of say, in terms of time and like the philosophy we're bringing to virtual events now is, and I alluded to this earlier, is really thinking about what you had brought up, Kim. Why is this online? Why is it synchronous? And trying to really emphasize that, yes, we want to hear about new research. Yes, we want to hear presentations from people, but making space for community and conversation. And we're trying to be really intentional as we come up with the slate for this year's events. And I'll shamelessly plug and put a link in the chat. We've just announced officially today that our first reading club event is going to be on April 28th. So if you would like to come continue the conversation around asynchronous online tutoring practices, that would be a good place to do so.
I think too, it's helpful to have the people who are always thinking about time zones in your planning group. I know for us, like, it's always helpful because Jill always reminds us, hey, you still need to think about not just people on the West Coast, but like folks like out in Hawaii and stuff too. Because if you have these things too early, you know, in the day for like, you know, even for like East Coasters, which, you know, I admit I'm an East Coaster. So last year, like, as that, I was always thinking about that, but it was good to have someone like Jill reminding us like, hey, you know, that early in the day is going to be really hard for somebody in this, you know, time zone or whatever to be able to attend that if they would want to. And so just trying to be mindful of picking times that there's going to be a wide variety of folks in different time zones that are going to be able to attend that event was something that I found really helpful. And so it was just nice to also have somebody on the planning committee that was constantly, you know, there to remind us and have us thinking about that.
Great. I think we have time for like one last final thought from the group, or anyone in the audience that has questions, let us know.
I think I'll just say, you know, thinking like, I feel like this is kind of connected to, you know, some of the things that you see with like online teaching, online tutoring, that there's often sort of a higher standard for organization, for accessibility, for things like that with this. And I really feel like if you want to like get your feet wet in thinking about kind of being able to organize events, get a chance to kind of know what it's like to kind of try to run a conference, an online event is a great way. And I'll be honest, it's not less work. I don't want you to think that, oh, this is less work, but I think it actually encourages you to be really intentional and mindful in ways that I think are really transferable to face-to-face. And that's kind of my hope, is that some of the, you know, kind of values and principles that are often at play, and often some of the things that we're thinking about with online events are actually kind of translated into hybrid, into in-person kind of events, so that we really can kind of think about making sure that kind of our professional development kind of experiences are inclusive, are accessible. So I think online, those of us that are interested in online events can be real kind of leaders broadly kind of in the field.
Kind of going along with that, and again, to insert a shameless plug, if you want to learn how to do this kind of work and be able to kind of like scaffold your way into it, check out the volunteer opportunities with OWCA. You can join us with virtual events, or next year's conference committee is going to be kind of starting to come together soon, and we are still looking for applicants for the conference co-chair for next year. So if you want to be actively involved and learn how to do this work, that'd be a great place to go.
And I'll say too, one of the things that's great about planning an online event is if you have ever wanted to have an opportunity to really improve your communication skills and both clarity and consistency, online event planning will do it. It really will. Whether you're a committee member or whether you're actually fully, you know, at leading the charge with an event, whatever it is, it will get you to really think about how you communicate with other people, how consistently you do it. It's kind of amazing because when you work on something face-to-face, it requires communication skills, but I think sometimes with online, because there are so many different parts and pieces you have to thoughtfully consider, it really makes you think about that.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I just have a few last things to share for the end of our conference this year. And if you do, of course, want to continue the conversation about these questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. I know we'd all be happy to continue those talks. And as Bree and everyone so rightfully plugged, we are looking for a vice president, as well as a conference co-chair. I will be taking on conference chair next year, and I would love to work alongside you. And you are also welcome to join any of our committees if you don't feel that you can take on such a larger responsibility. Thank you. A big thank you to all of our conference volunteers, our interpreters from More Interpreting, and the International Writing Centers Association. And I want to end with just a reminder for you to complete our conference survey, which I put in the chat before. And if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us at OWCA-conference@onlinewritingcenters.org. And that concludes our 2023 conference. We hope to see you again in 2024.
And just a reminder that materials will be available. So while we are finishing our live kind of parts today, we will be kind of these wonderful conference volunteers will be working to get all of our recordings with edited captions and transcripts ready for you in approximately 2 weeks. And conference materials will be available for all OWCA members through June. So we know this is such a busy time in the semester, but perhaps once the semester wraps up, you know, your year is over, grades are in, you know, you finished the last day of tutoring, you're ready kind of to take in some new information. All of our materials will still be there waiting for you.
Thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend.
Well done, Kim and Erin.